All right, hey everybody, welcome back. Good morning. Hope you guys are doing well. So it's almost 10. Got a few minutes left until it's 10, and then we'll get started. This is our Intro to Philosophy class meeting for Wednesday, April 29th, 10 a.m. to 10:50. So we're going to get it in a minute, but just get comfortable. Hopefully you guys are safe, healthy, and being as productive as you can be during these times. I'm here to talk to you guys today a little bit more about philosophy of mind and a new author on that. So we just continue through our notes in this class, and we're making progress as we get closer to the end of the semester. Just a few weeks left. But anyways, welcome back, everyone. Anybody who's arriving to the live stream, feel free to just say hi. Any questions, comments, or anything else, it's all good, and it's all encouraged. So I'll be right with you guys then, I guess, at 10. Sorry, oops, 1 second. Hey, good morning. Hi, Kaylee. Hi, Jordan. So we almost made it through April. Not bad. Don't want to, I guess, speak too soon, but yeah. Cool. Is philosophy a science? No, it's not. It's it's related to science, but it's not all about experiments and tests. So science involves the scientific method where you identify problems by observation, unexplained phenomena, right? You identify through observation, confirm or disconfirm the hypothesis to see if it's correct. But in philosophy, there's no such thing as experiments. There's just intuitions. It's just mental. You're just thinking through the a priori logical reasoning involved in an argument. So there's not a lot of, it's not about empirical evidence at all for the most part. It's conceptual arguments. They are conceptual analysis, like trying to determine the necessary and sufficient conditions for something just by using reason, not by going out into the world with tools to use for instruments, like to observe things. So philosophy does not involve a laboratory, telescopes, microscopes, but the results of science can be analyzed and discussed philosophically. The arguments about which scientific findings are more or less rational can be discussed in philosophy, yes, but it's not a science, no. I'm glad that it's not. It's a humanities, okay? So like it's in a whole different school. Philosophy is administered through the College of Letters and Science, through humanities, and science is given through the what do they call it? What's the term? STEM, like the social sciences and those things. But anyway, good question. Thanks for asking that and getting us started. So hey, everybody, welcome back. Hi to those that are in the chat here. If anybody else, please feel free to just say hello. It's always nice to hear from you guys and just see who's in the room, or in the live stream, I should say. But anyways, guys, yes, so we're working through, hi Bridger, William, good morning. Like I'm saying, we're working still through the topic philosophy of mind, and we have a little bit more material to cover there. So I'm just going to recap where we've been so far and then tell you what's happening today. So philosophy of mind, all about consciousness, thought, perception, mental stuff. What's the nature of that? Is it physical? Is it not physical? Some people are monists. They say everything in the universe is made out of one substance. The kind of monists that we're mostly focused on are the physicalists, which say the substance that makes everything is matter. Matter is just anything that's extended in space. Basically, at the ultimate level, it's atoms. So physicalists basically are saying that everything's made out of atoms, including in you and our consciousness. It's all just a physical process playing out of the brain. Now, on the other side, there are dualists. Those are people who say that everything in the universe is made out of two kinds of substance, and the two substances mentioned there would be both physical matter that we've talked about, but also the mind. And the mind is claimed to be an immaterial not extended in space thing, but it somehow is thinking and has consciousness. So kind of like a soul, spirit, something that literally just doesn't have any mass or matter, but yet is conscious, and it's not dependent necessarily on the existence of the body for its ability to think. Dualists say that there's matter, but there's also mind. When there's consciousness, there's a mind. Other than that, everything's made out of just matter. We studied an argument for dualism given by Descartes, and now we're at the part where we're trying to look on the other side to see what physicalists have to say. Quick re-summary of the Descartes dualist argument is basically based on conceivability. Since we can conceive of clearly the separation of the mind and the body, then those two things must be able to really exist separately, and therefore they're not the same thing. Why is it that these two things can clearly be understood to exist separately? Well, part of it is because you know that your mind exists, but your body's existence is subject to at least possible doubts. God makes sure that clear and distinct perceptions are true, because if they weren't, then he would be a deceiver, but he's perfectly good. And God is known to exist because we have an idea of him that would only be possible if it was caused by an infinite being. So Descartes' argument is based on the conceivability of the mind and body existing separately. And along with that, he also says that we have a certain knowledge that the external world exists and that you have a body. Those are also clear and distinct for a couple of reasons that he gave that we talked about, I think, a couple meetings ago. Okay, then after that, we started to look at the physicalists. Daniel Stoljar is one of the physicalists. So his essay we covered last few meetings. He says, first of all, physicalism is just the view that everything is physical. Everything's made out of matter. Now, to fully understand the position, he says we've got to look at two questions. Number one, the interpretation question, which is just the question, what does it mean to say that everything is physical? And then number two, the truth question, which asks instead, is it true that everything is physical? To answer the interpretation question, he points us to the concept of supervenience. Okay, so supervenience is a thing that happens when a large structure or system ultimately is built out of a bunch of little parts. So think of like a dot matrix image where the entire image is formed by a bunch of tiny little ink dots in a certain combination and pattern. You can think about a dot matrix picture made out of ink dots, or you can think of a digital image projected on a monitor that's made out of pixels. But in either case, the point is that the big structure is made out of little dots or pixels. A global feature is a term that just refers to any like large-scale aspect of such a composite. Now, the claim of supervenience is that because the global features supervene on the atomic base that composes it, if you had two separate dot matrices with an identical distribution of elements, parts, then they would have to have the exact same global features at the large level. And by hypothesis, if two dot matrices had different global features, then they must have different distribution of parts. So same parts, same whole. Different whole, different arrangement of parts in comparing two matrices. Now, the physical universe is thought of as something that's much like that because according to physicalism anyway, everything's made out of atoms. So atoms are the little bits or whatever, the pixels or ink dots by metaphor, by analogy, that build everything in physical space. And so if supervenience physicalism is true, then all we are and all everything is a just big bundle of atoms put together a particular way. And if there was a second universe which had the same atomic distribution of atoms, then there would be the same global features that that universe has with ours. So basically, consciousness would be the same of every being. The duplicate of you would have the same exact sensations and experiences in this hypothesized alternative possible world with the same atomic facts. Because what your consciousness is, I guess, according to this position, is nothing other than the arrangement of the atoms that form you and everything else. After that, he tries to defend the truth of physicalism by offering two arguments that we also covered last time. So one was the argument from causal closure, which basically says that everything that has a cause has a physical cause, and your mind, by thinking, can cause your body to act. Like if I want to raise my left hand because I just think of it, then the hand goes up. So the mind can cause the physical behavior of the body. But since every event that has a cause has a physical cause, and then because of premise 3, which says that there's only one cause for each effect, that means that the only cause of your bodily behavior is the physical brain doing it, not both the brain and some separate mysterious mind. And another argument for physicalism that Daniel Stoljar gave was methodological naturalism, which basically is simple. It just says that it's reasonable to believe what scientists do, and since they believe physicalism, that's reasonable for you to believe also. Okay, so just some summary to keep us on track. Now today we're going to continue to build this discussion of physicalism. We have a new author, and we're going to study his positions and arguments. So this is J.J.C. Smart now. J.J.C. Smart. So he was a philosopher of the 20th century who lived from, let me make sure I'm getting years correct here. Yeah, he was born in 1920, and then he lived until 2012. Okay, and in 1959 he wrote this paper that we're now going to talk about, which is called Sensations and Brain Processes. Sensations and Brain Processes by J.J.C. Smart. It's a small world, I guess, in philosophy. I have a little bit of an indirect connection to this author, actually, because I co-edited a book a few years ago with a philosopher who's a couple generations older than me, whose name's Chandana Chakrabarty. And when she was young, this was one of her advisors at graduate school a long time ago. But anyway, he was an interesting philosopher who worked in the area of philosophy of science, ethics, and philosophy of mind. And this paper of his, Sensations and Brain Processes, it has a pretty straightforward goal. The goal of the paper is to persuade you that physicalism is true, and why? Because according to the argument he gives, sensations that we experience are simply just brain processes. Now, what does the word sensations mean in his usage? A sensation is just any state of consciousness. Any state of consciousness that you could possibly imagine. So that runs through a whole wide spectrum of possibilities. One sensation is the sensation of watching a lecture on YouTube. Another sensation could be the sensation of, I don't know, going for a jog, riding a bike, having some ice cream and finding it delicious and tasty, listening to music, playing an instrument, having dreams, sitting back and just imagining stuff. The range of possibilities for states of consciousness is quite wide, right? But what they are, according to this author, is all of them, in all of their diversity, they're just brain processes at the end of the day. So what is it for a person to, let's say, be playing a video game and having fun? That sensation, that experience, that conscious state that they are in, according to this author anyway, is just the same thing as a brain process that's happening at that time. So when you feel happiness, sadness, anger, joy, fear, when you have memories, when you have expectations and hopes or dreams, what all those different sensations are just particular configurations of your brain state at that time. So that's what he's saying, that sensations are just brain processes. And if sensations, in other words, states of consciousness, if those are just physical brain processes, then that does support physicalism, because that means that everything's physical, not just stuff outside of us is physical, but we are these mysterious minds, but that everything's physical. Even the consciousness that you exhibit, that you experience, it's really just the playing out of various states of your brain. Okay, so that's his idea, and that's what he's trying to argue for. Why is he so convinced, or why does he think this is an important view? Well, one reason that he says that this is something plausible and reasonable is because suppose that consciousness and states of consciousness, sensations as he calls them, suppose they were not brain processes, right? Suppose they were something other than a brain process. Like, say, dualism is true, and your sensations are really just the action of your mind, which is this disembodied, immaterial thing like a soul. If sensations are not physical things, then they are something that is really mysterious and impossible for science to explain. And in that case, they would be what he calls nomological danglers. So little terminology, vocabulary for us now. He introduces the term nomological dangler. Okay, so what's a nomological dangler? It is something that remains unexplained by science. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. It just says nomological dangler definition, something that remains unexplained by science. Now, what's the goal of science? To explain like some of reality, but not all of it? No. Scientists want to be able to give scientific explanation of everything that exists in this universe, not just some stuff, not just most stuff, but everything. And if there's anything that cannot be explained through the scientific method, through scientific principles and natural laws, then that would be something that is mysterious and outside of the sphere of our knowledge and understanding. So if consciousness and sensations were not brain processes, then they would be nomological danglers. They would be something that is dangling outside from the scope and sphere of what we currently can understand through science. So that you kind of have a deeper insight into the term itself, nomological comes from the Greek word nomos, which means pertaining to law. So a nomological dangler basically means something that is dangling outside from, unattached to the content of what we understand through scientific laws. Now, nomological danglers are not the scientist's friend. The scientist sees a nomological dangler as a failure of the enterprise of science to give an explanation of something. So it's not like a scientist is just happy to concede that there are things that are unexplainable scientifically that we can never have a final understanding of according to physical laws. So he says if consciousness was something not that was not a brain process, then it would be a nomological dangler. And that, he thinks, is just not the most parsimonious way to see reality. You know, why should it be that most of reality can be explained through physical laws, but then we just say don't try and investigate human consciousness, right? Why should that be the case? I mean, as he says, it would be odd if human consciousness and so on was the only thing left out from our contemporary scientific understanding of reality, which seems increasingly able to explain more and more things about reality in terms of the ultimate physical and chemical constituents that make everything up. So if consciousness and sensations were not just resulting from or equivalent to brain processes, then they would be these nomological danglers, random things that would not operate or be understood according to general physical laws. And he says it's really not promising to suppose that most of reality operates according to physical laws, but that somehow human consciousness is a completely different breed, and that's where the limit of scientific understanding stops. Why should it be that only the things outside of us, material processes that are outside of human beings and consciousness, could be understood scientifically, but that somehow, no, don't apply those scientific principles to the human mind and consciousness? So his goal in the paper is to convince the reader that there's really no good arguments that compel you to be a dualist. And he believes that if he can take on the best objections that dualists could state against physicalism and rebut them, then at the end of his article, he thinks he'll show you that there's no good arguments for dualism, at least none that survive the rebuttals. Therefore, physicalism is better because it does not assume that consciousness is a nomological dangler. Now, deeply rooted in his paper is this identity statement that I'm going to write on the board. So his overall position and claim is just this. sensations equal brain processes. Almost like a mathematical equation. That's what they're equal to. Sensations are just the same thing as brain processes. And he wants you to kind of really understand how strictly this identity is being stated. It's not saying that sensations and brain processes are two things that have a close relationship to each other. That would mean that there's not just one thing, but two. He's saying, no, there's actually just one thing, the brain process, which we're labeling as a sensation, but that's just two labels for the same object. Like for me, for example, you could call me a professor of philosophy, you could call me a musician. These are two different labels that can be applied to me, but I'm just one thing, I'm not two things. So sensations and brain processes are the same thing by different names. When you have sensations and experiences, you don't think about the brain process that you're having at that time, because it would be a weird thing to consider. You know, you're just having the experience, right? But even though we don't label it as a brain process in ordinary conversation, it is just a brain process. That's what he's claiming. So it's identical to a brain process, not something separate from it, not something over and beyond or different from it. He makes the point that if you had a footprint and a burglary happened and you saw the footprint, you might say, oh, this footprint is correlated with the burglar. But it's not like that, because the footprint is a different thing from the burglar. We're talking about one thing that's labeled twice over, not two different things that have some kind of logical connection to each other. Okay, so sensations just simply are brain processes. So in other words, whatever experiences that you ever can have or do have, what that is just a particular configuration of the parts of your brain at that time. So next, after this, having stated his basic position, he goes ahead to consider objections to that. So he has a set of objections that he believes dualists might pose against this claim. And then his goal is to rebut and reply to each objection. So just make sure that you have the sort of logic of the dialogue in your mind here. J.J.C. Smart is a physicalist. He's opposed to dualism because he says sensations are just brain processes. If they weren't, then they would be nomological danglers, which is kind of like something that scientists wish to eliminate. No nomological danglers. Everything can be understood scientifically. So having put that position on the table, he next goes on and considers objections to the statement that sensations are brain processes. He doesn't agree with the objections, clearly, because he is a physicalist, but he wants to defend against the objections. So I'm going to treat you to some of the most important objections that he discusses in this paper, and then you'll see how he replies back to them. Everything good so far? Any questions about that? I'm always happy to see you guys break in if you want me to clarify or go over something twice, but I guess then, in that case, if we're all clear, the next step is to talk about the objections given to his position and how he replies to them. Okay, so now in the paper, there's 8 objections total that he mentions and that he then tries to respond to. But I don't want to go over all 8 of them, first of all, because that probably would take more time than I want to take, but also, more importantly, because I think some of them are less central than others, and there's also a little repetition. So I'm going to hit you with what I think are the biggest, most important, maybe 3 or 4 out of those 8, and that'll be our whole discussion of J.J.C. Smart. Okay, so objection number 1. So these are objections to this basic statement up here, that sensations equal brain processes. What could somebody say against that? Well, here's the first objection that he talked about. Objection 1. Okay, so objection 1 says that a person, an average person, like anybody, can easily talk about their sensations, but that same type of average everyday Joe can't say really or doesn't know really much of anything about what is happening in their brain. So since a basic person can talk about their sensations, no problem, but since they can't talk about what's going on in their brain, you could argue that they must be 2 different things. Okay, so that's the first objection. An average person can easily talk about their sensations, but is not able to talk about, because probably they don't even understand, their brain processes. So the two things must be different. So the two things must not be the same. Okay, so I'll explain this objection, and then we're going to talk about JJC Smart's reply to that. So you see it written here, and I'll explain. The claim of this objection is that people in their everyday lives, me and you, of course, included, can and do often talk about our sensations. That is just like the basic common example of talking about something that you experienced. So like if you said, I was playing basketball well, now you can't really play basketball, I guess, but I was playing a video game the other day, right? And I got so frustrated that I threw the controller. I was like getting mad because I couldn't beat the boss. Now you're telling me about the experience, the sensation, the anger, and so on. If you tell me, yesterday I had ice cream and it was like the perfect ice cream, this place was amazing, it was so delicious, so I really enjoyed it. You're telling me about the qualitative experience of having that sensation of eating the ice cream. If you say, I took a test the other day in a class and I was so focused on it, but I was getting nervous, so I think I kind of maybe messed up the test. Now you're talking about your anxieties and your performance and so forth on an exam. Anything at all that we experience, we can and we do just talk about it, and that's easy for us to do. But notice this, it's not easy at all, and maybe it's not even possible to talk about what was happening in your brain at that time. So for somebody who says sensations are brain processes, you might lodge this objection. You might say, hold on, they can't be the same, because sensations, we talk about them and that's easy. But if they're equivalent to a brain process, shouldn't we be able to talk about that with the same degree of ease? You know, so like when I say I had the delicious ice cream, here's what I'm not ever going to say. Someone says, how was the ice cream? And I say, you really want to know? Okay, well, I'll tell you. When I ate it, at that point, neurons in the prefrontal cortex started to activate, and that resulted in a discharge of dopamine to the pleasure centers of the cerebrum, and that's what it was like. You know, I mean, so look, I'm not a neuroscientist, right? And I'm just using jargon that is borrowed from that field. But the point is, no one really has much of a knowledge about what's going on underneath the hood, as it were, of their brain. They just have the experiences, and we talk about the experiences in the qualitative language of, you know, experience. But we don't talk about them in the object language of physical brain processes. So that is one reason that someone might argue they cannot be the same thing. How could they be the same thing? Because the way of talking about them bears no resemblance to each other. We talk about our experiences easily, and that's the substance of our everyday conversations about everything. But if that's the same as a brain process, how come I can't tell you what's going on in my brain? Okay, so hopefully you can feel that objection. But of course, JJC Smart doesn't just take the objection and say, okay, never mind, I guess physicalism is false. He is a physicalist, and so he wants to respond to this and show that it's not the best fatal objection of his view. So here's his reply. Reply. So he says this: two words or two descriptions can refer to the same thing, even if an individual person is not aware or does not understand that they refer to the same thing. Okay? So two words or descriptions can refer to the same thing, even if a person is not aware of this. I know it's a little low on the board, so I'm going to type it in the chat bar as well, but I'm going to write it first. So two words or descriptions can refer to the same thing, even if a person is not aware of this, is not aware that they refer to the same thing. Okay, so I'll just reproduce that in the chat so that it's clearly legible. Okay, so see it there typed out. And let me explain to you the way this reply goes. There's an example that is given here, which helps to make the reply clearer. Since we've already talked about the objection, I'm going to clear that part of the board. And I'm just going to add this one little note here. So as an example of what he's talking about here in this reply, he gives this example of the morning and evening star. Morning and evening star. That's what that says over there. Example given, morning and evening star. So let me give you this quick little true story that illustrates his response here. Okay, so if you go back in time a ways, at a given point in the history of our past, people would get out at night and they would look at the night sky with all the stars up there. And there was this one individual star that was so bright, and it was the brightest of all visible in the night sky. So they gave a name to it. They labeled it the evening star. So what is the evening star? It's the brightest star that you can see in the evening sky. Okay? Now, at the same time point in history, you got to imagine, before electricity and all that artificial light, a lot of more stars were visible in the night sky, but also even in the early morning sky at dawn. So people who would rise in the morning very early could still see visibly certain stars in the morning sky too. And the brightest star that you could see in the morning sky was labeled the morning star. Okay, so what's the evening star? Brightest star in the evening sky. What's the morning star? Brightest star that you can see in the morning sky. Now, as time passed, eventually a discovery was made. More powerful telescopes, better observations of the night and morning sky had been conducted. Let's see if you can just make an inference. What do you think was this discovery that I'm referring to here, pertaining to the stars, so to speak? We found out, it was discovered that what? Do you have a guess? What could it be? Just let me know and then we can go over whatever you say. That they are the same star, exactly, Jessica, yes. It was discovered that they're the same object, the same star. In fact, if you really want to get technical, it's the planet Venus that looks like a star from the surface of the Earth. But it's the same star. Not Emily, no, it's not the moon. The moon, we can clearly tell is not a star. It's very close to the Earth, so there's no one mistaking that for a star. But that they're the same star, exactly, yes, that they're the same. So think about that. We have two words, evening star, morning star, but how many objects? Just one. Now, just because the two words look like they refer to different things, and even though it seems like they don't even have the same definition, they're still just one object that they both refer to. Okay, so the two labels should not confuse us or mislead us into thinking that there have to be two distinct objects because there are two different labels invented in language. Okay, this example was first mentioned by a very important German philosopher of the 19th and 20th century, whose name is Gottlob Frege. I published a paper on him actually way back in the day. It was my first thing that I tried to write and publish, and he's important because he developed more powerful logic languages that eventually were instrumental in the development of computer programming and other things. But he's a major figure in logic, philosophy, and math, and in linguistics. Anyway, he talked about the morning and the evening star because he said that here are two words that have different meanings or senses, but they have the common same reference. And he gives the example of this. Like, so suppose that you have two different people with way different sleep habits. One person is the night owl that never gets up early and stays out all night. And then their friend, this is an unlikely friendship, I guess, but their friend is like the ultimate morning person. So they always go to bed early and they're up in the morning as early as possible. So you got the night owl and the morning person. Suppose that they like talk one time during like a small window in which they're both still awake, and they have this conversation. Evening guy is like, hey, morning man, I need to tell you something. I know you don't like staying up. I know you like going to bed at like 6:30 p.m. or 7, whatever. But you really should one time try to stay up a little later because you're missing out on some cool things in the night sky. For example, Have you ever heard of the evening star? The morning guy's like, no, I've never heard of that. Can you tell me what is it? He says, well, let me say to you, it's just this beautiful star in the night sky. It's the brightest one up there. It's majestic. It just sparkles in the sky. So it's an amazing thing. You really should check it out. And the morning guy's like, well, maybe someday I will. I don't know. Whenever I stay up, it's something I hate to do, but maybe I will. But here's the thing, evening man. You're missing out on some stuff in the morning because you stay up so late. You sleep like a vampire through the day. But if you would just one time try to get up a little earlier, you'd see that there are actually some beautiful stars in the morning sky at dawn. And the brightest one up there in the morning, we call it the morning star, and it's amazing. Have you ever seen that? And the evening guy's like, no, I've never seen that. I don't like the morning, and so I'll take your word for it. Okay, now look. These two people look like they're having a conversation about how many stars? 2. In fact, the one guy says, no, I've never seen it. The other guy says, yeah, I've never seen the one you're referring to. But really, they're referring to the same object by 2 different labels. Okay, so just because we have multiplied the terms associated with the object doesn't mean that there therefore have to be more than one actual object. Sort of like with me. If I introduce myself to one person at a party and I tell him my name is like John, and I'm wearing a costume, and then I introduce myself to the same person later at the same party with a totally different, very realistic costume on under a different name, they may say like, yeah, I made 2 friends tonight. John, he was cool, then he left early, and then I talked to this other guy, Richard, a few hours later, and they're really different people, but they're both interesting. I'm just one person being presented under 2 different appearances in that case. So sometimes language can create more than one label for an object, but there's only one object. Another example given by the author in this discussion here is about lightning and electricity. So electricity was not always understood, of course, by human beings, but lightning has always been there. So imagine people, prior to the modern era looking at lightning and thinking, wow, this big bright thing in the sky. If you told them, what is electricity? They say, I have no idea. I've never even heard that word. But does that mean that lightning is not an electrical discharge of ions in the Earth's atmosphere? No, it's the same thing. So we describe it qualitatively as big, bright flash in the sky, or we could describe it in the scientific, physical way as, the discharge of ions. But that doesn't mean that it's 2 things, the lightning and the electricity. Lightning just is electricity. So again, the sensations and brain processes, we don't have any habit and nor do we have any reason to talk about our sensations in the language of the brain process that is then occurring. That would suit no practical purpose, right? If somebody asks you, how's the meal, the waiter, and you're like, oh yeah, frontal lobe fully flooded with dopamine. I mean, the person would be like, huh, I can't even understand what that means. So it would not really serve the conversational purposes of everyday life, but it's not literally false, though, that it is a brain process, at least according to this perspective of physicalism, okay? So I'll read a little bit from the book, and you can see him put the point in his own words that I've now tried to explain to you in the lecture. So he uses pretty colorful language. I don't know why he feels the need to frame it this way, but here he phrases the objection. The objection says, any whatsoever about neurophysiology. A man may, like Aristotle, believe that the brain is an organ for cooling the body, without any impairment of his ability to make true statements about his sensations. Therefore, the things we are talking about when we describe our sensations cannot be processes in the brain. Now his reply. You might as well say that a nation of lazy people who never saw the morning star or knew of its existence, or who had never thought of the expression the morning star, but who used the expression evening star perfectly well, could not use this expression to refer to the same entity that we refer to and describe as the morning star. A different example, consider lightning. Modern physical science tells us that lightning is a certain kind of electrical discharge due to ionization of clouds of water vapor in the atmosphere. This, it is believed, is what the true nature of lightning is. Now note that there are not 2 things, a flash of lightning and an electrical discharge. There is one thing, a flash of lightning, which is described scientifically as an electrical discharge to the earth from water molecules. The case is not like that of explaining a footprint by reference to a burglar. We say that what lightning really is, its true nature, is the electrical discharge. But of course, the footprint is not literally identical to the burglar. And so, to conclude, in short, the reply to the objection is that there can be contingent statements of the form A is identical with B, and a person may well know that something is an A without knowing that it is a B. An illiterate peasant, I don't know why he needs to use that phrase, but an illiterate peasant might well be able to talk about his sensations without knowing about his brain processes, just as he can talk about lightning even though he knows nothing of electricity. So this is his rebuttal to that possible objection. Therefore, let's take stock of where we're at. J.J.C. Smart, he's defending physicalism. He says sensations, they're just brain processes. So the only thing that some people believe is not physical, namely consciousness, it's physical too, because it's just brain stuff going on, and that's physical. In reaction to that claim, somebody might say, no, they cannot be the same, because I talk about my sensations, that's straightforward and easy, but I can't say much, if anything, about the brain process, which you're claiming is equivalent to it. So how could they really be the same? I can't talk about them both in the same way. And I don't understand the brain process, but I understand my sensations. Now he gives you these examples of how there could be different labels for the same object: morning star, evening star, lightning, electricity. And in those two different cases, it would be a mistake to say that because there's two different descriptions or labels, terms, that there must be two things. We can see clearly in the morning and evening star that that's one object despite the diverse labels given to it. And he says we should think the same of the brain states that could be variously described as sensations, but they're really nothing other than brain states. Okay, so that's the first objection. Now, let's see. I'm going to go to objection 2 now. So, objection 2. Now, here's the thing I want to make clear. If you just kind of digested objection 1 and the reply to it, that's the most essential and important objection and reply to comprehend in this paper. The others, a lot of them repeat a little bit the themes and ideas given in that first one. So that would be the core of the paper, just getting that very clear in your mind. Now I'm going to sort of take you through some of the additional objections and replies, but a lot of them revolve around the substance of the first one too. So objection 2, the terms sensation and brain process have different meanings, so they must be different things. Different meanings, so they can't be the same thing. And the reply he gives to this is very similar to the reply of the first objection. It's just that two words can have different meanings, but still just refer to the same object. So, okay, so I mean, if I described myself to you as, let's see, it's my father's first son, my father's oldest son. So oldest son who runs, that's a different description than saying philosophy professor at Chapman. The two descriptions, maybe they refer to the same object. In this case, they do, but they don't have the same dictionary definition of each other. Neither does morning and evening star, right? Evening star definition, brightest star in the night. Morning star definition, brightest star in the morning. Those definitions aren't the same. The meanings are different, but there's still only one thing that they refer to in both cases, right? So once again, we shouldn't be led by language into thinking that a multiplicity of terms always amounts to a multiplicity of things referred to by those terms. If I tell you, let's say, President of the United States, or CEO of the Trump organization, right? Those two words don't have the same meaning, but they happen to refer to the same individual, at least for now. So anyways, just knowing that two terms have different meanings does not settle the question of how many things are being mentioned by the two terms. It could in the end be just one, and that's what he's saying is the case with sensations and brain processes. When you think of a sensation, you're talking about the qualitative aspect of having the experience as the subject. When you think of the brain process, you just think of the objective physical condition of the brain exhibited when that sensation is being experienced. But though those are two different meanings or descriptions, there's only one process happening, the one brain process. Okay, so that's his response to objection 2. I'm going to jump around a little bit to objection 4. Objection 4 is basically that sensations don't have any location in space, but the brain process does, so they must not be the same. Okay, so with this next objection, the claim is that if you really think about where your sensations are located, you can't think of any location where they are at. Right now, I'll ask you, try to have a memory of like a birthday from your childhood. Okay, go back in your memory bank and try and retrieve a memory right now of whatever you did back then in an elementary school year on your birthday. Okay. Now that memory, where is it physically? Is it in your room around you? Is it outside of you somewhere? Of course not, right? That doesn't make sense to say the memory is it's over here to my left. But also, is the memory something that I will find if I dissect your brain? If I, suppose that someone could go through the contents of your actual physical body inside your head. Would they find the memory in there? Would they be like, oh, here it is, I found it. It was buried somewhere in the brain. No, of course. You just find flesh and blood and, the brain material itself, the matter of the brain. So it seems like your sensations don't really have any position in location or in space. But where's the brain process located in space? That's easy. It's a brain, it's in your head, so it's physically located in the head. Now we might say there's a discrepancy. Like if the sensations and the brain processes were the same thing, then there couldn't possibly be, one of them has no position and the other does. But in reply to that, the author yet again says, look, the sensation is a brain process and the brain process is located in space. So there's actually no difference here. It's just that in everyday language, we would never have a reason to talk about the position of a sensation that you're having in its physical location. So reply. The sensation is a brain process and is located in the brain. Now, to make this example, he refers to the concept of an after image. I'll just say a brief thing about this word, what is an after image. So if you ever look at a light source, just briefly, I don't want you to hurt your eyes or anything, but if you say look at a light bulb for a half split second and then you close your eyes, you'll notice something. You'll notice that there's a faint after image in the outline of the light source that remains in your closed field of vision. So I have a chandelier right above me, and if I look at it and I close my eyes, I'll continue for at least a moment to see the purplish outline in my darkened field of vision as in the same contour and shape of the light bulb that I looked at. Okay, so where is this after image at, he asks. Of course, the after image is not floating around in space objectively, nor is it something that you'll see behind my eyelids or in my brain, but the brain process, which is claimed to be the equivalent of the afterimage, is clearly something that's happening inside the brain. Nonetheless, you see his reply, that though we have no practical reason to state to a person, I had a delicious, ice cream cone, and by the way, the flavor and the taste and the whole sensation is here in my brain. That's something that you could say, and it would literally be true, I guess, according to a physicalist anyway, but it would make you sound kind of like a little bit like you're losing your sanity, because there's no real normal reason to have to mention such a thing aside from like theoretical investigations of the nature of consciousness, which is not what we just do in everyday conversational contexts. So yet again, he says, don't be misled by the fact that our language seems to make it appear as though your sensations have no physical location. There's just no convention in speech of talking about them that way, but if you want to really be precise, they are a brain process, so he argues, and then they are actually located in the brain, so there's no discrepancy after all. Sensations do have a location. They're located in the brain because they're simply brain processes. Now there's two more little objections after that I want to go over at the beginning next time. I'll just kind of gesture at what they're going to say for now, and then we'll be able to quickly wrap them up at the top of the Friday meeting. But another objection is that the sensations seem not to have any, like they're private. They cannot be felt or seen or experienced by others. So if I pinch myself, I feel the pain, but you can't. So sensations are private to the subject, but the brain process can be publicly observed. So, a person with the proper instruments could conduct a brain scan on me when I do the pinching, and they could see, like, I don't know, a pain center in my brain start to become activated. And maybe they could say, well, look, the scientists and neuroscientists, they're looking at your brain process, but they're not looking at your sensation because you're the only one that can have that. So you might argue that there's this private-public difference. The sensation's private, but the brain process can, in principle, be examined by third parties. And he again says that's just about a linguistic difference. The language that we use to talk about our experiences is the language of the subjective. The language that we use to talk about the brain process is the language of the objective, because that's the objective case of the brain. But nonetheless, they're the same thing being referred to twice over by language. And then the last objection will be this Descartes objection. That's the idea that we can imagine ourselves having sensations even if we had no body and no brain at all. Since Descartes says that's clearly conceivable, doesn't this show that they can't be the same thing? Obviously, if sensations were brain processes, then a sensation could not exist without a brain. But if you think you can clearly imagine sensations without a brain, like just a disembodied consciousness, then maybe they're not the same thing. And to that, J.J.C. Smart says that it sounds like this individual is claiming that consciousness arises from a ghost or a soul instead of from a brain. But he says, let's just consider that an alternative theory. There's the brain theory and the ghost theory. And he says, even if I cannot definitively rule out the ghost theory, I would just put it to you that the brain theory is more plausible and has more empirical and scientific evidence to support it. So he says, let's just say that people can hold their brain theory or their ghost theory hypothesis for what causes consciousness. But he would just think that it's a more estimable, reasonable position to take the brain theory. Okay, so those are two last objections. I just briefly try to summarize here. I'll recap them at the beginning of next class. But on Friday, guys, just read Alan Turing. Alan Turing's article is called Computing Machinery and Intelligence. So we'll go over that on Friday, and then that'll be our last look at philosophy of mind. And then starting next week, we'll get into the last topic of the semester, which is life, death, and the value of life. So thanks again, everybody. I appreciate you guys' attendance. You're doing really well in my class, and hopefully you're doing good in your other classes too. But for now, anyways, take it easy, stay safe, and I'll see you back on Friday. Make sure to read the Turing, and if you need anything else at all, just let me know, okay? Have a good one, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.